Dennis Marma, and I'm with Get Abstract. I look after strategic accounts, and I'm located in the thriving metropolis of Poquag, New York. I do also want to say a few brief words about Get Abstract, sort of the obligatory part of today's call. But as many of you know, Get Abstract strives to change the state of knowledge with our clients, right? So we do this with a collection of over 15,000 summaries of business books, videos, articles, and economic reports that are curated in partnership with The Economist. And we're committed to add value to our clients in a variety of ways, which is exactly why we've invited you here today to join this webinar to provide an opportunity to meet with our guest of honor, who's already introduced herself, and I want to do more. She's an author featured on Get Abstract, Lisa McLeod. And it really is an honor to introduce you to Lisa. I consider Lisa a friend of mine. We've known each other for just about 10 years now. I'm a true believer in her purpose methodology. She's a true thought leader, author of several best-selling books. Leading with Noble Purpose was her latest. Selling with Noble Purpose, The Triangle of Truth. Her books have been recognized by the Washington Post as the top 5 business books for leaders. She's been profiled in Fortune magazine. She writes a weekly nationally syndicated column. Her leadership commentary appears on Forbes.com. She's featured in Wall Street Journal, New York Times. She's a rock star. So Get Abstract has worked with Lisa for several years, webinars, dinners, breakfasts, and the feedback that we always get is outstanding. The ideas that Lisa has shared during these events were always so valuable, and so much so even I was able to apply some of her ideas the following day. So very practical and useful information. So without further delay, please let me pass it along to Lisa McLeod, my friend.
Thank you, Dennis. I feel like I have a lot to live up to. I appreciate that. I want to talk to you all about this idea of noble purpose in business, because one of the things that's happened is as companies have gotten bigger and bigger, and we've gotten more and more metrics on things, for a lot of people, work has become a real grind. And so I want to share with you some really startling and kind of depressing information, but don't worry, I have an antidote to this. So right now, if we look at the Gallup numbers, we know that 68% of people are not emotionally engaged in their job. And this is really kind of a crisis. And you may be one of those people. If you are, we have some solutions for you. And if you're not one of those people, you're feeling the effect of those people because they work with you or they're your customers. And these are the people that I say are showing up for work every day with their bodies, but they're leaving their brains and, most importantly, their hearts at home. And so every day just sort of becomes a rinse and repeat of the day before. Here we go. It's time to go again. And this is actually having a chilling effect on revenue and sales. So I want to share with you some really interesting statistics right now. I work in the land of sales most often. And one of the things that we know now is only 50% of salespeople are hitting their targets. This is really, really depressing. Another piece of information that we know is only 6% of the sales opportunities that people have, so the opportunities they've entered into their CRM, only 6% of those opportunities are going to close. And now here's the most depressing statistic of all. In a study of business professions, people were asked to rate professions in terms of trustworthiness. And did you know only 3% of people thought that the sales profession was trustworthy? And this really breaks my heart. And you think, okay, well, we've talked about a couple things here. We've talked about this idea that people are not engaged at work, talked about the idea that companies have become bigger and more complex, talked about the idea that it's taking longer to close business to business sales. These are not disparate things. They are actually all connected to the same thing. And I want to explain to you why. You see, in business, there are two things that you need to run a successful business. You need competitive differentiation. Your organization needs to stand out from the competition, to have something distinctive. And you also need people who are emotionally engaged. And what I mean by that is we've all been in those companies where it's just sort of a rinse and repeat of the day before, and you can feel it as a customer. You can also feel it if you work there. And we know the difference between a company where the people are alive, like a Disney, where you go and almost everyone you meet is excited about their job, versus you go to, some carnival where they've got a bunch of rides set up and, half the people just look like they're totally glazed over while they're doing it. That's pretty dramatic, yet the same thing is happening at work in a little less dramatic way. And so we've got these two things that we know are essential to a thriving organization: competitive differentiation and emotional engagement. But the problem right now is we tend to treat those two things very differently. Competitive differentiation is the responsibility of the product people or the marketing people or the salespeople have to put a certain spin on things. Emotional engagement is treated like an HR issue or a leadership issue. But what's happened is we've siloed these. And what our research has revealed is that those two things actually spring from the same source, and that is your noble purpose. And so what we know is that organizations that have a clear noble purpose, whose North Star is to improve their customers' condition, those organizations experience greater competitive differentiation and more emotional engagement. And so I want to tell you a story about how I first discovered this. As Dennis said, we've known each other for 10 years. And, now a lot of people are talking about purpose at work, which is really, really exciting. This concept has really become embedded in the fiber of forward-thinking companies, but it wasn't always this way. And so I want to talk to you about I'll share a story with you about how I first discovered this, and then how you can apply it to your business. So about 10 years ago, I was asked by a big biotech company to study their sales team. And what they wanted us to find out was what differentiated the top performers. So if any of you have been in sales or had salespeople call on you, you know the difference between a good salesperson and a bad salesperson. And it's pretty easy to look at inside a company if you're running a sales team. And any of you who are chief revenue officers or VPs of sales, I'm sure, or sales managers, you've seen this play out. The good salespeople know their product. The good salespeople, frankly, work harder. They go out and make sales calls. They understand the customer. They're more disciplined. The difference between good performance and poor performance is pretty easy to spot, and it's a series of teachable skills. What's more challenging, though, is to identify the difference between good performance and exceptional performance. That tends to be a little more nuanced. So do the exceptional performers know their product better? Maybe, but how do you put your finger on what it is? Are the exceptional performers, do they do better on discovery calls? Well, maybe, but again, it's kind of nuanced. And so this is always the challenge. And it's a challenge in a lot of fields. When you're looking at the difference between good performance and poor performance, you can spot it. But good performance and exceptional performance, it shows up in the results. But to put your finger on what the differentiator is more challenging. And so that's what this very large biotech company wanted my team and I to do, was study their sales team and see if we could discern what were the things that differentiated the top performers. Because if we found out, then we could teach it. So we went out in the field and worked with their people. And the thing that was super interesting about this was a biotech company, so they took a very scientific approach to this. The study was a blind study. And what that meant was the other consultants and I did not know which performers were which. We knew that we were not with any poor performers, but they said you're going to be with good performers and exceptional performers, but we're not going to tell you who's who, so that it's a blind study. And this was genius because the idea was that we might spot something, so we wouldn't be preconceived to think anything. So we go out in the field, we work with these salespeople, shadowing them around, following them. How many questions did they ask? How long did they spend with the doctor? They called on doctors and nurses and providers. And it was all in search of this elusive thing. What makes the top performers different? And we also did one-on-one interviews, trying to see is there anything in their background that might stand out. We were near the end of the study, And I was with a representative in Phoenix, Arizona. I had shadowed her for 2 days. As a sidebar, you can imagine how thrilled all these reps were to have a bunch of consultants shadowing them, but they were good reps, so they sort of put up with us. But we were near the end of the study. I'd been with this one representative for 2 days. It was in Phoenix. I was about to get out of my car and walk into the terminal, the airport, where I was going to catch my flight home to Atlanta. And being Phoenix, it was really, really hot. And so I just was sitting there in the air conditioned car, and I kind of had a minute. And I'd been friendly with this rep over the course of 2 days. And so I decided to ask her a question that was not on our list. And I asked her, what do you think about when you go on sales calls? And I will never forget her answer. She said, I don't tell this to very many people, but when I go on sales calls, I always think about this one particular patient. She said, I was early in my career with this company. I was standing in one of the doctor's offices, had on my suit and my name badge, so I stood out. She said, this little old lady came up to me and she said, excuse me, miss, are you the representative for this drug? She said, I looked down at her and said, yes, ma'am, I am. She said, the little old lady looked up at me and said, well, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving me my life back. Because prior to taking this, I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. And now that my doctor has prescribed this for me, I can get on a plane. I can fly across the country. I can visit my grandkids and I can get down on the floor and play with them. So thank you for giving me my life back. And as this representative is telling me this, she was getting really emotional. And I found myself getting emotional listening to her. And she went on to say, I think about that little old lady every single day. She said, that's my purpose. That's why I do this job. And as she said it, the emotional resonance of the moment just really hit me. And keep in mind, this was 10 years ago. This was before people were talking about purpose at work in great detail. This is before Simon Sinek, Find the Why. It was before all of that. But I thought there was an emotional moment there that I thought there's something really important here. And I thought, is this sense of noble purpose, what I now call noble purpose, is that the magic thing we've all been looking for? In all these clinical studies, in all this coding of the information, how many questions, how much this, how much that, is it this emotional component? And so I got out of the car, got on the plane, flew back from Phoenix to Atlanta, which is quite a long flight. And I just kept turning it over and over in my head. And when I got back to the office, I decided to go back through the interviews with a different lens. And so I went back through all those interviews, searching for this sense of purpose in the anecdotal comments. And I found it. I found it in the representative who said, my father was a doctor. That's a harder job than most people realize. I just want to make the doctor's life a little bit easier. I found it in the representative who said, oh, I'm on fire for the science. All told, I found 5 representatives that in their comments had revealed this sense of greater purpose. And at the end of the study, the pharmaceutical company asked us, who do you think the top representatives are? And I said, I think it's these 5. And I was 100% right. And I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know in your own heart to be true. And for me, that moment was a turning point because it put a name and a frame on a concept, an emotional concept, a psychological concept that I had always instinctively felt but couldn't identify. And so that moment for me was a turning point because I decided I was going to make it my business, my purpose, to study this. And over the course of 10 years, this has become my life's work, but I can tell you the data could not be more clear. Salespeople who sell with noble purpose, who strive to improve their customers' condition, outsell salespeople who are focused on revenue targets and money. And this is really important because the same thing also applies organizationally. There's been a good bit of research on this, and organizations who have a noble purpose bigger than money actually outperform the market by over 350%. There was some research from Jim Stengel, a person I used to work with at Procter & Gamble. His research revealed that. There's been research that says employees who have a sense of greater purpose are half as likely to leave their organizations. And this is really important for us because it puts a name and a frame on the emotional and psychological component at work that has largely been ignored. And I want to be really, really clear on this. Having a noble purpose does not mean that you are doing great work philanthropically. Having a noble purpose does not mean that you're saving lives. A lot of companies, like this pharmaceutical company, did actually save lives, and noble purpose companies that we've studied tend to do more philanthropic work. But those two things are ancillary. What is critically important is at the centerpiece of your business, at the centerpiece of your commercial model, you and everyone in your organization has absolute clarity about how you improve the lives and businesses of your customers. That is a noble purpose. So, for example, I run McLeod & Moore, which is the consulting practice that I founded. And our purpose is we help leaders drive revenue and do work that makes them proud. Because I know that when a company is profitable, it can produce greater innovation. It can be a better employer. So for us, our purpose is to help people drive more revenue to become leaders in their space and at the same time do emotionally engaging work that when somebody asks what you do, you're excited about that. That when your kids talk about what you do, they're excited about it. And it was interesting, if you caught the pre-show comments when Dennis and I were talking, Dennis said when he first read Selling with Noble Purpose, Dennis has been a successful salesperson all his life, selling really big deals. He said, when I read that, it was like you were speaking to me. Dennis, I don't know if you're still available. You're welcome to chime in on this if you still have audio controls. Are you there?
I think I am. Can you hear
Great.
me?
Well, yeah, tell me what you thought about this and why this resonated with who you already were.
Well, it was cool to me because when I read the book, it made me think that I already have these practices, that I already embrace this concept, but you articulated it in a way that made it even more real. So
Mm-hmm.
I super enjoyed reading the book,
Because it was
reading
about you.
the summary, because it was about what I already practiced, but you actually refined it even further. So it was extremely helpful. It was an eye opener.
Well, and thank you. And a lot of the top people that read the book say, yes, that's who I am. But what we wanted to do in the book was articulate this is who these people are emotionally, then provide a roadmap so that the people who are already thinking that way could sustain it. And so that managers, leaders could cultivate it in other people. And that's the important thing because we know that everyone wants purpose and meaning. Once you get beyond food and shelter, human beings have two core needs. We want connection and we want a sense of meaning. We want to know that we're part of something bigger than ourselves and we want our work to have value. You know, we spend so much of our life at work, it needs to be meaningful. But the challenge is right now, the way business is run, this narrative of profit and earnings and bonuses and all these things. You know, if you've been in the workplace for a long time, I have been in the workplace for 25 years, we were always focused on making money. But the difference between then and now is we didn't have the lifetime instantaneous feedback loops that we have right now. So years ago when I was at Procter & Gamble, you know, we had quarterly numbers and things like that. But because we didn't have the infrastructure and the internet and all that, we didn't have all these lifetime numbers. And so what's happened now is having those insights, having instantaneous information, that's great. But what happened was it was supposed to improve employee performance, but what it did was it stripped the real meaning and purpose from work. And it didn't happen by design, it happened by default. And those of you that are looking at the screen now, you see, they told me every great presentation needs to have a tweet. So there's my tweet there on this. But again, the important thing here is it doesn't happen by design, it happens by default. So no one's out there saying, how can we make the workplace less meaningful? How can we strip all emotion out of the work? No one in their right mind would say that, because we know, back to competitive differentiation and employee engagement, both of those spring from that noble purpose, that sense of meaning and that passion. But what's happened is we've created in the workplace right now a situation where we've got these dopamine addicted feedback loops. And so I'll give you an example that's near and dear to my heart. I work with a lot of big sales teams, and now they get instantaneous feedback on individual sales calls. We can listen to sales calls, we can do the analytics on them. And so what's happening is, as a result, we've created these dopamine addicted feedback loops. And by dopamine addiction, I mean the little hit you get when you get a like on Facebook. Dopamine is a chemical that is associated with happiness, but it's associated with short-term happiness. Serotonin is more associated with meaning and purpose and long-term happiness. And you need both in the workplace. But what happens is, if all you're focused on is, did we get the deal? Did we get the deal? That's a monster. That's going to be this dopamine loop that you just have to have more and more and more of. And we've seen a lot of examples of what happens in that. The scandals with Uber, total dopamine addicted organization. Some of the banking scandals where people will lie and cheat just to hit the number. And what happens is there's too much dopamine, it's addictive, and there's not enough serotonin. Because the dopamine, I often compare it, dopamine's kind of like lust, and serotonin is more like true love. And I'm all for lust. That's a great way to start something, but it's generally not sustainable because you need more and more and more. And what happens is you get in this feedback loop where, did we hit the number? Did we hit the number? Did we hit the number? With no talk about how are we improving the customer's condition. Then you get worse than dopamine. You get in a situation where you have your lizard brain going all the time, and you're in that fight or flight, and you've got a fear-based organization. And we know, again, the data tells us that a fear-based organization may hit the number for a quarter or two, but they will not be sustainable for the long term. We know that an organization that has more of a serotonin focus, how are we improving our customers' condition, along with financial rigor? But when you have that, how are we improving the customer's condition, then you will actually wind up making more money. And so it's kind of ironic. The people who overly focus on making money quickly wind up making less money. And here's the other little secret. If you're listening to this as an individual performer, I want to tell you two things. The more you focus on purpose and meaning, you won't just only be more successful, you'll be happier. Because this lizard brain that you see up here right now, when you're in that, did we hit it? Did we hit it? What can we do? What can we do? That's frantic. And it's a very unhappy way to live your life. And it will have a spillover onto your family and onto everyone else involved with you. When you are focused on improving someone else's condition, and in business, that someone else can be your customer or your teammate, you become more successful and you become significantly happier. So here's the other little secret that I'll tell you about noble purpose. You don't have to wait for your boss, and you don't have to wait for your company. If you are working in a company right now that has a sustainable business model, that sells something that people are paying for, I can promise you somewhere in there, you have a noble purpose. People would not be buying it if you were not improving their condition in some way. And so what happens, though, is if you read the company's mission statement, maybe even have a purpose statement, those lofty documents, you'll find it in there. But the cadence of daily business often strips it away. And what I liken this to is, if any of you have ever had a child, when that parent looks at that young baby, they don't wish and hope, one day I hope you join the ranks of the disengaged employees. No, you have this greater sense of purpose and meaning, and you're so excited, and you think this baby's going to be everything. I'm going to be the best parent ever. It's going to be wonderful. And then what happens is the cadence of daily life with having to make a living and having to get the dinner and having to pay the bills often strips away that sense of purpose and meaning. But just like in business, the people who can maintain that sense of higher purpose in their personal lives, in their relationships, experience better relationships, and they experience more personal happiness. The same thing happens in business because we're not a work life and a home life. We're just one person walking around. So how do you bring this to the fore? Ideally, you do it on an organizational level, but I'll tell you, you can start on an individual level. And I have been astounded, humbled and astounded at the individuals who've done this and had it spread in their company. So there are three things you need to ask yourself. Looking at your organization and your role, the first question is, how do you make a difference? How do you improve the lives of your customers? And if you are in a customer remove situation, I want you to think about this two ways. How does what your company does make a difference to customers? How does your role contribute to that? So you might have to go two back. It might be, what is the company doing? So, my younger daughter works at the Ritz-Carlton. She's in a customer-facing role. We have all kinds of people that are in non-customer-facing roles. So how does this hotel, and their motto is ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen, how do they, when they're creating these personal experiences for their clients, how do they make a difference? And then if you're in a customer removed role, if you're the AC guy or the backstage person, how does what you do improve that experience? So make sure you answer that on a deep level. And the second question is, how do you do it differently? How do you as an individual do it differently? And how does your organization do it differently? And then the third question is, on your best day, what do you love about your job? And so we call these three the three discovery questions. And what we saw in our research was the people who had deep, meaningful answers to these three questions were the people who experienced more personal happiness at work. And they were also the people who were more successful at work. Because you see, what happens in a lot of organizations is we do the value proposition. If you look at these three questions, the first one gets to the value prop, the second one gets to competitive differentiation, and the third one is rating emotional engagement. But the language I just used, value prop, competitive differentiation, and employee engagement, that's the sanitized business version. And you tend to, when you look at it that way, get very sanitized, non-differentiated business answers. They don't move the heart and spirit. And so what we found was phrasing these three questions a little bit differently really gets to that deeper interpersonal response that does move the human heart. It's funny, we talk about business, and one of the things you may have heard that I often heard, especially early in my career, is let's keep this professional. We don't want to get emotional. And so I want to go on the record as saying that is the worst advice ever. That is just really, really stupid advice, because I have yet to meet a CEO who said, if there's one thing I could change, I wish my people weren't so passionate. Everyone here just cares too much. It's making me crazy. No one says that. The idea that we should strip emotion out of business comes from people who are, one, afraid of emotion. A lot of people are. It also comes from a desire to make rational decisions, which is really important in business. You don't want to make erratic decisions. But most of the time when people talk about not wanting to get emotional at work, what they really mean is they don't want someone to get angry. Or what they often meant for me was, please don't cry in my office, because I don't know how to handle that. And so the idea that you shouldn't get emotional at work actually is a really bad idea, because if we want to be passionate, if we want to create passionate customers, and oh, by the way, you can't create passionate customers unless you have passionate employees. If we want to have that experience at work, we're going to have to bring the full breadth of our human self to work. And what you often see in organizations where people have tried to make it non-emotional, it actually winds up being very emotional, and the emotion is negativity. And so what we want to do is these three questions provide you with a way to light up your frontal lobes. I talked earlier about the lizard brain, your most primal self. Oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Fight or flight. Your frontal lobes will light up if you answer these three questions and you think deeply about them. And your frontal lobes are where creativity sits. It's also where problem solving sits. If you can get yourself focused on these questions and then get the team around you, and ideally your entire organization focused on these three questions, what happens is everyone is literally showing up smarter, more creative, more empathetic. And that's where you start to create more competitive differentiation and greater emotional engagement. So I want to share with you some results of some companies that have actually done this and what happened. So one of them, two of them, in fact, are publicly traded companies. One of them that I mentioned a good bit in Leading with Noble Purpose is a company called Blackbaud. They are a SaaS company, software as a service company. And when they embraced this, their CEO embraced the idea that they have a noble purpose. Over the course of an 18-month period, they not only grew their revenues, but their stock price went up by 70%, and they became a best place to work for millennials. Now, Blackbaud, before they embraced this, was a fine, decently performing company. But what this idea that we have a noble purpose and we make a difference to our customers, making that the ethos of the company, increase the employee engagement. Then from there, we increased the emotional engagement of the customers. They started to make a series of different decisions, and they ended up actually having some technology breakthroughs. So I want you to compare, and I'll talk to you about these other three companies in just a second, but thinking about a software company, compare the difference between a room full of coders where their boss comes in and says, okay, we need a breakthrough because we're not going to hit our number and we need to sell more stuff and we need a breakthrough that's going to beat the competition. They may or may not come up with something, but at Blackbaud, they were hearing from their CEO, here are some of our customers. Here's how we're making a difference to them now. Here's what we care about. Here's what they care about. Now, how can we get even better at this? So instead of this, we've got to do better, hit the number sitting in the center of the room, what we had literally at Blackbaud, they brought customers in and they talked about how can we improve their condition. And so once you have everybody in the company thinking in a deep, meaningful, personal way about your customers, you innovate. So that's why they had a breakthrough. So a couple of other clients who have embraced this and had similar breakthroughs, G Adventures, an adventure travel company based in Toronto. They were already a top performing company, and they were having 25% year-over-year growth, now at up to 35%. They have one of the most engaged workforces I've ever seen. If you want to go on Google G Adventures videos, and you will see the craziest group of people ever that are on fire for adventure travel. Hootsuite was another software company. And by the way, all these companies are in the book, Leading with Noble Purpose, and we're very gracious about being public about what they did because they want other people to do it as well. Hootsuite doubled revenue. Major company, Flight Centre, based in Australia. They've got 80,000 employees, got some of the highest employee engagement scores in the world. And so what these companies did is what you can do as an individual, what you can do as a small team, or as a larger organization, which is they started asking a different set of questions. And instead of the driving question being, how can we hit the number? How can we make more money? The driving question became, how can we improve the customer's condition? How can we, in the case of, G Adventures, their purpose was we help people discover more passion, purpose, and happiness. In the case of Hootsuite, their purpose was we help our clients turn their messages into meaningful relationships. Flight Centre was we care about delivering amazing travel experiences. So those are examples of where they named and claimed a purpose bigger than money, and then they aligned everything in their organization, from the way they ran their meetings to the way they do deal reviews to the way they hire people. And it happened over time. But in every one of those, it started with those three questions. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, my boss would never go for this, I want to tell you, Flight Centre was the largest company we've had to date that implemented this, 80,000 people around the world. And it started with one manager who read the book and did it with her team. And they got better results, and people wanted to know how. And then it went regionally, and then it went to Australia, and then it went globally. And so They did all that just by one manager reading the book saying, these are the 3 questions we're going to ask at our meetings, and everything started to change. So if you're thinking, oh, my boss will never go for this, in a 1-year period, they went from one lone manager reading this to a year later, the CEO standing up and saying, this is the way. So don't underestimate your own power. So I want to give you an example, a really specific example of what this looks like. And I'll use a sales example because that's really, really easy for folks to understand. So in most sales organizations, when you've got a deal on the table and the manager is coaching the rep, the questions the manager will ask are, when are you going to close it? How much is it going to be? Who are the decision makers? And what's the competition? Standard questions, really, really important questions. But think about it I'm going to take it from 2 points of view. Think about it from the rep's point of view. If I ask you, when are you going to close it? How much is it going to be? Where is your brain? Your brain is on yourself at your deal. Okay? Think about it from the customer's point of view. If the rep is about to come into you, before they come into you, their boss is asking, when are you going to close it? How much is it going to be? Is that rep thinking about you? They're not. So I want to share with you a game-changing question. And this can be used in a sales situation or a couple other situations, which I'll tell you about in a second. And the question is this: how will this customer be different as a result of doing business with us? So imagine you're that rep and you've already got down, when are you going to close it? How much it's going to be? You've got all that down. Those are the basics. But what happens to your brain when your boss asks you, how will this customer be different as a result of doing business with us? Your brain automatically shifts from yourself to your customer. And you're thinking, I don't know. How will they be different? A couple things happen there. If you don't have a good answer, your likelihood of closing this deal is not going to be very high. But the other thing is, if that is the driving question that your boss asks you every time you meet with a customer or every time you do a deal review, how will the customer be different? That's going to have a cascade effect. And we've seen it happen. That's why those companies I just showed you closed more deals, closed bigger deals, closed them at a higher level. Their customer retention is up. Because what happens is the rep and then everyone else involved starts asking that question early on, how will this customer be different? So the reps do better discovery calls. How will the customer be different? I don't know. There's a lot more information I need to find out. I need to find out about how they're doing it now, and what's the upside, and et cetera. So the reps get out of doing that product pitch because they are being charged with a different question by their leadership. Then what happens is when you hand it over to customer success after you closed it, they've got a different set of criteria because you've already decided, how will the customer be different? Then when you talk to product development, they say, well, here's how we're affecting our customers now. What else can we do? So when you change the driving question and you make the driving question, how will the customer be different? Everything changes from there with this one single question. Because going back to our rep, if my boss asks me, how will the customer be different? What's my brain on now? It's not on me and my deal. It's on the customer. And that's what it should be on, because we know that drives better sales performance. Now, I told you I was going to think about it from 2 perspectives. If you're the customer, which question do you want the manager asking your rep before they walk into a call? When are you going to close it? Or how will the customer be different? You see, changing this question, what this does is it changes you from a transactional relationship, because a transactional relationship is always based on you thinking about your part. And it shifts you to the relationship that larger companies, more successful companies want to go to, which is that trusted advisor status. But you have to change the internal question, because the internal conversation drives the external conversation. And if the internal conversation is all about targets and transactions, you will become a very non-differentiated transactional organization. But if the internal conversation is about how will the customer be different, then you will move yourself into a differentiated trusted advisor situation. And it all hinges. So if you take nothing else away, take that one question. Now, I want to share with you, I'm going to break a 20-year ban on sports analogies to share one with you. today. And this is how I want to wrap this up before we take questions. So a lot of people ask me, how do you measure noble purpose? Because most of the things that I've just described to you are more qualitative things. They're more emotional, they're more nuanced. They result in improving your quantitative results because the qualitative always drives the quantitative. But a lot of people are numbers people and they say, how do you measure it? And I'll be honest with you, in the early days of talking about noble purpose and implementing with clients, I didn't have a good system, but that has changed. We now have a good system. And I took my inspiration from ice skating. So if you're looking at the screen right now, the pair that you see here is the German ice skating pair that won the gold medal in the Olympics. And they were fabulous. Now, I should tell you, I am not an ice skater. None of my children were ice skaters. My knowledge of ice skating comes solely from the Olympics. So every 4 years, I get a little dose of ice skating. And when I watched this pair and I saw their performance, I thought, I know they're going to win. And in ice skating, this is the interesting thing. They have two scores. They have the technical merit score, which is for doing all the jumps and all the turns. And it is a very check the box score. It is very black and white. And as an observer and listening to the sports commentator, I can see, oh, they did 2 triples, check the box. But they also have a score for what is called artistic impression. And artistic impression is more qualitative. It is how emotionally engaged were you in your performance? How much did you engage the audience? If you look at this beautiful photo right now, you can see that these two people are emotionally engaged with each other. You can look at the way their arms are turned, the way their faces are looking. That is artistic impression. It's everything from the music and the costumes, all those more nuanced things. And here's the thing. In the Olympics, they score artistic impression. And what I observed is, as a layperson with no deep knowledge of the sport, I can also score artistic impression because I know it when I see it. And so when you think about this idea of noble purpose, it is measurable. It is measurable in the way that you speak to customers. It is measurable in the questions that you ask in meetings. It is measurable in the type of information you have on your presentation deck. It is measurable in about 57, and we have a list, 57 small ways, just like artistic impression in ice skating. These ways tend to not be quantitative, but I'll give you an example. At Blackbaud, one of the things that we did was we took the transcripts from their town halls and fed them into a word cloud to see which words they use most. And this example is in the book. We worked with them on the language, bring the customer front and center. They were just so on board with it. The CEO, Mike Giannone, great guy, was totally his ethos, jumped right into this. A year later, when we did a word cloud from the transcript of their town halls, instead of talking about themselves and their software, it was all about customer impact. So it is absolutely measurable. And here's the thing I'll tell you about ice skating. In ice skating, nobody wins on technical merit. Technical merit will get you to the Olympics, but you will not win, because once you get to a certain level, everybody's got that down. Everybody can do it. Where people win and where this couple won was on the artistic impression. The technical merit, they were flawless, but so were some others. And so I share that with you because in today's time, if you are just looking at quantitative metrics and you're trying to head your competition, you will create a situation where you become commoditized. The road to success is on that artistic impression, is on doing 1,000 little things with more flair, with more passion, and with more energy. Because even if you have a very quantifiable competitive advantage, it's only a matter of time before your competition does too. But it's the ethos that you create, that sense of noble purpose. When you possess that and all your people possess that, That is the source of competitive differentiation and emotional engagement. That's the thing that helps you become one of those top tier companies. And the good news about this is you don't have to invest in new software. You don't have to do big things differently. It's doing 100 little small things differently. And it's changing the emotional cadence of the business. And that's what will put you leaps and bounds ahead of the competition. And the best part of it is you have the power to do it within yourself. You do not have to wait for anyone to start this. You can do it absolutely on your own. And it is absolutely catching. So I'm going to pause now. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I will take some questions if folks have questions. You can go ahead and put them. Let's see if we've got some here. Do we have any questions?
Hey, Lisa. There is a question that I see. Can we get
Yeah,
the slides?
yeah.
But as people are maybe typing in their questions, I think I wanted to share something really quick with you because I really do embrace everything that you've just shared with us, and this has been spectacular for me because it really, really resonates. So my noble purpose is to help people advance their careers, and that sounds maybe a little bit, I don't know, cheesy a little bit, but I look at it from a little bit different perspective because we can reach the masses with what we do. It's an online service, but I actually focus more on my contact that I engage with within my clients so that I could help make them become heroes because the success of the program is crucial that we have an understanding of what they're looking to accomplish. So I line our solution back to important priorities within my client's organization. So my noble purpose is really focused on that individual, but it expands to the masses. And I think maybe a good example, and this is maybe kind of funny too, one of the things that I do with my clients, with many of them, is we survey some of the users that use Get Abstract, and one of the questions, kind of a corny question, but describe Get Abstract in 3 words. My favorite response ever, I think it was from Deloitte. I might be mistaken, but the response was enables super genius. So sort of the Wile E. Coyote part, but I thought that was so telling because it highlights my accomplishing my noble purpose. I thought that was so cool.
Well, and it's not without coincidence that it stayed with you. If I said, wow, you guys are so efficient, wow, they were all on time, that wouldn't stay with
Yep.
you. But we as humans are hardwired, it's in our DNA. We want to make a difference to other human beings because, you could argue whether that's our spirit, that's our soul calling, or that's just a basic method of survival that you need a tribe around you, whatever lens you want to look through. Yeah. And so the idea, especially as a seller, that you're focused on, if you look at the person in front of you, and I'm looking across now at my colleague Elizabeth, who's here with me, and I'm thinking across the desk, if I was selling to her, she was selling to me, I don't want to be looked at as a target. I want to be looked at as how can I help this person? And I also want to be really clear on this that having a noble purpose and wanting to help others does not mean that you don't have good financial rigor because companies that give everything away and companies that are unprofitable have a great difficulty attracting and retaining good employees. They don't have a good workplace and they rarely innovate. So the idea of profit being at odds with purpose is actually false. I think I'm looking at the list of questions. Dilsey, do you want to look at that and maybe read off one or two of them? It looks like we have a fair amount.
Yeah, one of the questions that I see on here, Lisa, for you is why do people resist noble purpose?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I do have the more forward-thinking companies embrace it, and there are people like Dennis who go, "Oh yeah, that's me, that's who we are." I do have some people resist it, and I think that is for one of two reasons. The first reason is we tend to silo things, and so when people say, "Is it about purpose or is it about profit?" they want to make it a very black and white issue, and a lot of people's brains work that way. that they're very factual thinkers. There's no gray area, there's no nuance, and we should love those people because they're probably some of the people who have, contributed scientifically or organizationally in really good ways. But the first reason people resist noble purpose is they silo it and it feels like a radical departure. I'll tell you, it's not a radical departure, it's an enhancement. The second reason is a little more disappointing, though. The second reason is a lot of people resist emotional engagement because they are afraid of it. And when you talk about, there was an article Elizabeth and I put on LinkedIn that went viral a couple of years ago called Why Millennials Keep Dumping You, an open letter to management. And it talked about how this younger generation really wants, so most of the article was written by Elizabeth, who is a millennial. And it talked about how, as a millennial, people, they are more heightened in terms of their desire for purpose. So every generation wants purpose and meaning, but the millennials are the first generation that will quit if they don't find it. And what was interesting was the response to the article was a lot of people went on, the responses really came into three groups. One group was the people who were like, yeah, right on, we all want purpose. I'm 60, but I still want purpose. Or yeah, I'm a millennial, that's why I left my last job. And so the majority of responses were really positive. But there was a very large, I'd say 20-25% group of the responses where the people were just so negative, and it was unbelievable. And the thing about LinkedIn that's amazing is when you comment on LinkedIn, you're commenting as yourself. So this isn't just some internet troll going under, tough guy number 3. And people were saying things like, managers were saying things like, business is about profit, you find meaning elsewhere. The sooner you realize you're a transaction to your company, the better off you'll be. And I'm just thinking, I bet you're just super fun to work with. And so there is this mantra, and it's kind of an old school mantra. Like when I was coming up in business, talking about meaning and purpose was something that you just did in the nonprofit space. It was sort of the secret yearning a lot of us had, but we put it aside because we felt we had to make a living. And so I think there's some people that were schooled, as I was, and then they just don't want to acknowledge. They've stifled it for so long. They don't want to acknowledge that the world has changed and it's okay now. So I think there's a real resistance in that. But I'm happy to say that's a small percentage of the people. But the third group of responders that was really interesting to this article, and these were my favorite people, these were the people that said, absolutely, purpose is important. And I'm a recruiter from Campbell's Soup. We put purpose and meaning into our work every day. Please call us if you're looking for a job. I love those people. But it is interesting, and in terms of the way people respond, and some people respond very viscerally positively, and some do respond viscerally negatively. And so if you've got a boss like that, if you are like that, you probably cut off this webinar, 5 minutes in. But if you have a boss like that, what I will tell you is you have to meet people where they are. And if you are thinking that these concepts would work in your company, instead of going back and saying, I want more purpose and meaning, you should go back and say, I found a way that we can increase our competitive differentiation, and the data says that we will make more money. And it's igniting more passion in our people. So make sure you lead with the thing that's going to be the most interesting to the person on the receiving end. Okay? So we've got 4 minutes left. So I want to just wrap up and tell you, if you'd like more information on this, you can visit our website, which is McLeod and More. I work all over the world. I do keynotes and workshops along with Elizabeth. We also do consulting projects. And all of our work is really centered on those two pieces: competitive differentiation. How can you stand out from the other organizations, your competition, the market? How can you be that unique, different, special organization? And how can you and your team be absolutely emotionally engaged and love what you do while you're doing it? Because, it's interesting. We get sort of reluctant to talk about the word love at work. And there's lots of kinds of love. There's love of your country, love of your children, love of your spouse. There's romantic love. There's love of ideas. But in every organization, we always want our customers to love us. We want our employees to love their jobs. And the way that that starts is inside the company. And so the idea of bringing love into a company is really about you answering those questions. How do you make a difference? How do you do it differently? And if you look back on your job the last couple of years, on your best day, what were those days when you were just on fire? When did you absolutely love your job? When you start thinking deeply about those questions and you bring those to the fore of your daily work, it is an absolute game changer. It's a game changer for your customers, it's a game changer for your company, and most importantly, it is a game changer for you. So I'm going to hand back over to Dilsey. It's been a pleasure. If you'd like more information, reach out to me. Feel free to ping me. We've got a white paper called The Purpose-Driven Business, which we will happily share with you, and you are welcome to share it with anyone else in your company. And that'll actually probably help you a little bit more than the slides because it's got a little more factual information on it.
Yeah, well, on behalf of Get Abstract, I would like to say thank you to you, Lisa, for the webinar, and also for all of you for attending. For any questions on Get Abstract and how we may assist your organization, learn more in less time, you can email us at info@getabstract.com. And thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I value my partnership with Get Abstract, and they are one of the reasons why I come across as a very well-read person. Because I can read all these abstracts, and I use it all the time.
I'm obsessed with it. Hey, Lisa, thank you so much. This has been absolutely spectacular. I
Great.
so enjoy hearing you talk.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
All right, enjoy.